Hey. Apparently, I'm live now. Hello? Okay. I hope you can hear me. If you can hear me, that just send me a tweet, send me a message, put something in the chat room, because I'm really sorry, first of all, that I am 9 minutes overdue. When I go live, I've done it a few times on, like, when I've done a couple of. I've done a Dracula stream, and I did another stream that I can't remember. And you just hit go live, and it shows you a little image in the corner of your screen of your video, and you just like, great, go live, shows you an image, it takes you live. With the scheduled one, it was like, connect your streaming software, and I was like, that is an option on the instant live one, but the other option is just go live and use the inbuilt encoder. So I was like, oh, maybe at 2:00 it'll just allow me to go live because that's when it's scheduled for. It didn't, and then there was the panic. The panic really set in. So I've just been manically trying to work that out. So if you're in the chat room, which you can chat on, or if you're in, you know what I can do? I can just watch my own stream and see if my volume's coming through there. Shall we do that? Let's get some horrific feedback. Okay, take the do not disturb. Shall we do that? Yeah, I'm working. Great stuff. Okay, lovely. Well, welcome to this reading, this live recording of fantastic grimdark book by Herbert Liam Tyneside called Leslie Ash is Shallow. No. HL Tinsley's We Men of Ash and Shadow. Awesome book. Really pleased to be working on this. Very much enjoying it. It's right up my street, and I think it marries very well with my voice. So I'll just set a couple of things up here. Just to make sure that everything goes smoothly. Turn that off. Okay. Right. I feel a bit nervous now because of all my having to faff about, but that's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter. Plus, I can see people are watching it already, which is frightening. But there we go. When I've done it previously, I didn't have my little second screen open to see if people were watching it. I just pretended no one was there. Okay, so I guess I'll just crack on. This is this is chapter 3, Henriette. Testing the mic on my recording software. Hello. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Okay. Henriette. As with many great changes, nobody had really noticed anything happening until it was too late. People went about their business, willfully ignorant to the suffering of others. The country had found itself in the clutches of economic strife. There was hunger, disease, and discontent. Whilst the poor wasted to nothing, the rich remained wholly unconcerned, until the first of the riots began. Just need to retake that, sorry. Didn't like the way my texture was. Wholly unconcerned, until the first of the riots began. The rebellion had spread slowly at first. It is a common misconception that war must begin with a great act of violence. Anyone to have lived through one will know that they often begin quietly, imperceptibly, with the smallest changes in the wind. Tensions had been running high between the classes for years, long before the first shot was ever fired. Everywhere you went, the poor outnumbered the rich, and the rich outgunned the poor. It was the same for the residents of d'Orsay as it was in any other city. Civil war had raged for 5 years. In the end, it had finished where it had begun. They all reaped the consequences of their actions, nowhere more so than in the capital itself. The city had been almost at breaking point when a young military officer with a talent for politics stepped up to offer them a solution. He promised them a new sort of government. After years of violence, the country longed for resolution. He had a promise. Longed for resolution. He had promised a place for everyone in the new world. Before long, Captain Felix Sanquin was the most powerful man in d'Orsay. The old establishment was dead. The war over. Within the first 12 months of his tenure, anyone in a position of power with links to the lower classes had been cast out. There was segregation. Sanquin had divided the city. People now lived in zones decided by their status and rank. Anyone who protested had disappeared in the middle of the night. There were a lot of accidents. More than one liberally minded official had washed up on the banks of the canals after a tragic fall from the towpaths. In a few hours' time, Sanderson, or one of his squad, would find a fresh corpse discarded somewhere downtown. They'd cite it as a robbery victim or a terrible accident. You'd be surprised how many accidental throat cuttings there were. There had always been a thin line between control and chaos. At least, the people that Vanguard killed were real criminals. Perverts, rapists, and murderers. Nobody would lose any sleep over their deaths. Vanguard never did. The rain was easing by the time he found himself nearing home. The Tanner's was located in the eastern section of the Black Zone. It still stank, even though the tannery itself had been closed for a few years. Everything was bathed in a kaleidoscope of grey. Stacks of discarded machinery and metal lay in haphazard piles across the length of the yard. Right at the back of the neighborhood, there was a house squeezed so tightly into the space between the buildings that it looked like it was holding its breath. Vanguard pushed open the gate and tried to avoid the puddles as he walked towards the front door. Vince was standing outside, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. There was a fresh black eye on the left side of his face. Clearly, it had been a busy night. Once inside, Vanguard unbuttoned his jacket and walked through the hallway. The walls were covered in brightly patterned wallpaper that peeled at the corners. Pictures hung in mahogany frames. Each contained a different photograph of a girl. They were depicted reclining on a plush sofa, completely naked. It was a menu of sorts that customers could peruse whilst they waited. There was a light on at the end of the hall. Henriette was sitting at the table in the parlour. There was a young girl sitting next to her. Sorry. Oh, that sounds quite quiet. Wait, hold on. That sounds a bit weirdly quiet playback. Which is, maybe it's just because I'm streaming? It's probably because I'm streaming. I mean, the waveform looks fine. I mean, yeah, the waveform's fine. It's just... Oh, wait. Henriette was sitting at the table in the parlour. There was a young girl sitting next to her Vanguard had not seen before. A china teapot sat between them, and Henriette had set several large, scented candles burning. Jasmine was her favourite. She felt it gave the house an exotic feel. She noticed Vanguard lingering in the hall and waved him in. Henriette was thick-set, heavy-bust, thick-set. Henriette was a thick-set, heavy-busted woman with a huge amount of curly black hair permanently pinned up on the top of her head. The word most commonly used to describe her was sturdy. It always looked as though her clothes were fighting a losing battle. She ran the house and gave no quarter to any customers who stepped out of line. Given the choice of spending time with anyone in the entire city, Vanguard would have chosen Henriette every time.
"John, come here and see my new girl."
She gestured proudly towards her companion. The girl looked less enthusiastic. She didn't speak, but did glance up furtively. She obviously couldn't have been there more than a few hours. She still had that look on her face that suggested she had other options. It wouldn't take long for her to realize there were far worse places to work. Vanguard pulled out a seat at the table and poured himself a cup of tea. Henriette cleared her throat loudly. The girl obediently offered him a small cake from a tea plate. He offered. Well, no, he didn't. He was the one who was offered. He spoke through a mouthful of crumbs. "Do you have a name?"
"It's Ruth."
There was an air of abject disinterest in her reply.
No.
Henriette shook her head.
"We talked about this. It can't be Ruth. Not anymore. It has to be alluring, sensual. Nobody wants to fuck a Ruth. Your name is Carmen."
The name suited her. She had a dark look to her eyes that didn't quite seem to fit the youthfulness of her face. Vanguard suspected that she knew a lot more about the world than she ought to. There wasn't an awful lot to her. The girl seemed to be made up of overly long eyelashes, overly long limbs, and not much more. Whoops. To her, the girl seemed to be made up of overly long eyelashes, overly long limbs, and not much more. Henriette reached over and pressed a thumb against the girl's chin, rubbing away a smudge.
"Go to bed now. We'll get your picture taken in the morning."
Carmen got up. It was at this point that Vanguard realized she wasn't wearing anything on her bottom half, other than underwear. They watched as she walked down the hall, turning at the end and heading up the stairs to the second floor.
"I'm thinking about putting her in the Desert Empress suite."
"She looks like she'd snap in half."
"Oh, I'll soon fatten her up."
They made a little conversation. Vanguard ate another cake. Before he went to bed, he gave Henriette the pouch he had received from Sanderson. The rooms on the first floor of the house were rented by the half hour. They all had a different theme and corresponding costume. The girls lived on the second floor together. Henriette had the third. The ground floor was made up of the I didn't like the elocution of that one. Had the third. The ground... Sorry. My headphones are being a bit naughty. Are you working now? Are you working now? How about now? How about now? Oh, now you're working. Right. 1, 2, 1, 2. This is what you do. What happens when you switch technology just before a live stream. There we are. Okay. Henriette had the third. The ground floor was made up of the hallway, the parlour, a waiting room, and a defunct second bathroom. That was where Vanguard slept. It was at the back of the house and had rusted pipes lining the walls. Henriette had put a mattress on the floor for him, but most nights he slept in the tub. There was something more familiar about being in an enclosed space. He had been renting the bathroom for 6 months, and not once had they ever discussed money. Vanguard simply gave Henriette what he made. She never asked him about his work. She never complained if he took food from the pantry. If they had lived in another world, Vanguard could easily have spent his whole life in comfortable companionship with Henriette. He had asked her once. Yes, I said that right. I second-guess myself sometimes. About 3 weeks after he had taken the room, after a particularly busy night, Vince had been knocked out cold by a customer who had snuck a metal pipe into one of the rooms. Apparently, that was always a potential occupational hazard. There had been a screaming from the first floor. That particular customer liked the girls to have bruises. Henriette had shot the customer in the leg with the pistol she kept tucked into her corset. In his apparent haste to get out of the building, he had left his belongings behind. There had been a bottle of gin wrapped up in brown paper. Vanguard had arrived home from his business that night to find Henriette waiting for him. They had sat in the parlour and finished most of the bottle before the sun came up. Vanguard remembered it as being one of the most pleasant evenings he had ever had. It was probably the gin talking, but he had asked Henriette to marry him. She had laughed at him, not because she was cruel, but because the idea was ridiculous. Another few weeks of living at the house, and Vanguard too had come to realize that Henriette was not that sort of woman. She had a business to run. She ran it well. Just as Ludnor had, Henriette had found a way to make the new world work for her. The next day she had marched into the bathroom and announced that Vanguard could only stay under the provision that he met 2 conditions. Firstly, he was never to ask Henriette to marry him ever again. Secondly, he was not to drink Oh dear, that was a noise. Secondly, he was not to drink again, as, obviously, alcohol turned him stupid, and Henriette would not abide stupid lodgers. Vanguard could stand to give up a lot of things. There were hundreds of rooms across the city, and plenty of people looking for a lodger. But Henriette had something that was a rare commodity in their world. It was the will to survive. Since that day, he had never again asked her to marry him, and not a single drop of alcohol had passed his lips. Surrounded by death, Vanguard looked at Henriette and felt like she might be the only person he knew who was truly still alive. Thus ends Henriette. Save that bad boy. And just check a couple of things. Yeah, been going for 40 minutes now. That's flown by. That's when a goodies book, mate. A goodies book. Frying my brain cells. That's when a book is good, when you know it's good, when you just go, oh, thought that was 20 minutes. It was actually double that. I've got terrible news. My favourite thing to refresh my mouth with is fizzy water, and this leads to an excess of gas that the microphone picks up very well. So if you are not a fan of such noises, maybe just listen to put mute on and just watch me lip read. I don't know. Okay, I just need to make a new file for the next chapter. For the squirrel in the jar. I like it when books don't have an intro as well, prologue, because that means file 1 is chapter 1, file 2 is chapter 2. Mwah. Don't be doing this forward prologue nonsense where by the end of that, chapter 1 is file 3. My brain is not a particularly adequate one at the best of times. Can't be doing with this. Okay. Just bear with me. Alan O'Donoghue says woo in the chat. Alan O'Donoghue, if you like. Thank you. Thank you for the woo. I'm glad this has you wooing. I'm glad to have wooed you. Ever since doing this book as well, when I in real life, I talk like I narrate in real life because I spend quite a lot of time getting into character and pre-reading and stuff, and now my wife currently wonders why she's moved in with why she lives with someone possessed by the ghost of a 17th century earl or something. Okay. Louise, dear, please could you pass me the television remote? Thank you. The Squirrel in the Jar. Tarin had entered the world to great acclaim. His birth had been announced in all the society papers. He had been told several times over the years that on first introduction many of the highest-ranking ladies in the city had proclaimed him to be the most beautiful child they had ever seen. His mother had carted him around town, taking him to every afternoon tea or ladies' club she could find. She delighted in coordinating their outfits. By the time he was 2 years old, Tarin was a regular feature in all the most sought-after venues. For the first few years of his childhood, his father had protested. Tarin was far too pretty for his own good. Being perpetually cosseted by simpering women wasn't helping. After a while, his father had stopped paying him any attention. As a teenager, he had grown accustomed to hearing the words his mother used to describe his father. Eventually, he had learned what they meant. With each passing year, he heard them uttered with increasing regularity. He was a scum, a wandert, a bastard. Those were some of the more charitable terms she would use. He heard worse, and heard it often. Tarin was no less striking as an adult than he had been as an infant. Just over 20 years had passed, though now people rarely paid him the compliments they once had. The ladies did not fawn over nor admire him any longer. Instead, he began to fade into the background, lingering in the corners of rooms, until eventually people simply forgot he was there. As far as society was concerned, the shine had gone from the diamond. Unfortunately for him, whilst Tarin may have, over the years, come to accept his descent from grace as unavoidable, his mother was prepared to do no such thing. It was Saturday night at the Granville Club. The bar area was populated by the usual crowd. Vapid women with too much time on their hands, overworked waiters, and miserable-looking husbands. Oh, I did that when I was pre-reading it as well. That's when my Yorkshire comes out, my native Yorkshire. And miserable husbands. Husbands, aye. Overworked waiters and oh no. Time on their hands. Overworked waiters and miserable overcompensated. Women with too much time on their hands. Overworked waiters and miserable-looking husbands with fat wallets to match their stomachs. They mingled over drinks and gossip. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, and velvet draped from every corner, even in places where there were no windows, simply because it could. The lights caught in dripping diamond necklaces, each one winking out, as if to motion to its counterparts. Two women stood next to each other, partly obscured by an ice sculpture, which seemed to serve no purpose other than to provide people with something to stand next to. Their voices could be overheard quite clearly. Bad diction. Or elocution, can't remember. Either way, it was crap. Their voices could be overheard quite clearly. Not that they were trying to be quiet.
What does she think she is doing?
The shrill sound of unbridled laughter pierced with low... Nah. Trying to be quiet.
What does she think she is doing?
The shrill sound of unbridled laughter pierced the low murmur of polite conversation. It was like nails being dragged across a chalkboard. Taryn watched his mother, beaming like a cat, as she mingled with a group of financiers. Excuse me. That was a biological error. One of them flinched, startled by the sudden peal of mirth. He hadn't said anything remotely funny as far as he could tell. Unperturbed, Lady Learsac reached out one hand and placed it lightly on the banker's arm. The champagne had been flowing liberally all night. As she leaned forward, she lost her balance, liquid spilling from her glass and leaving splashes across the front of her dress.
I don't know how she even has the gall to keep showing her face here. It's quite pathetic.
The taller of the two women made a clicking noise with her head. I suppose the tongue's in her head, isn't it? Still counts. The taller of the two women made a clicking noise with her tongue and shook her head.
I've heard all the money is all...
Rob. And shook her head.
I've heard the money is all gone. Nothing left but pennies. It's positively tragic.
The tone of her voice did not suggest any sort of sympathy. Her friend twisted one finger in a string of beads that trailed down her throat and disappeared into her cleavage. The pearls twisted, making a gentle crinkling noise.
I heard the husband was an absolute reprobate. More pox in that house than there is in the dock slums. Shameful!
There was a squeal from across the room, as Lady Learsac recognized a few of the women on the opposite side of the bar. She stumbled towards them, loudly exclaiming and offering pleasantries, which were met with haughty sideways glances. The women seemed to band tighter together, creating an impenetrable barrier. The two women standing at the ice sculpture snorted as they watched Taryn's mother tapping insistently at the shoulders of her former peers. Taryn slipped back further into the corner, wishing that he could just melt away into the wall. It had been a mistake to let her leave the house, but she had seemed... But she had seemed so calm that afternoon. Sooner or later, he would have to go and retrieve her. There would be a scene, and it would be all Taryn's fault, as usual. She would curse at him, and tomorrow the gossips would have something to talk about over breakfast. Heat from the combination of the lights and bodies had caused the ice sculpture to thaw slightly. A puddle had formed on the floor, forcing the women to step back so as not to dampen their skirts. The shorter one backed into Taryn, who had no space left in which to escape. She turned slightly. Her face puckered and sniffed.
Oh, it's you. I think it's time you took her home before she humiliates herself any further.
On that, at least, Taryn could agree with them. It was long past the time to leave. He walked across the ballroom floor and touched his mother on the arm. Confused by the interruption, she turned around. Immediately, she beamed.
Look who it is! Have you met my boy? He's such a good boy.
That was Yorkshire again.
Such.
Such. If you're posh, you say such. She beamed.
Look who it is! Have you met my boy? He's such a good boy.
The ladies looked at one another, exchanging disapproving grimaces. Most of them were the very same ladies who had been enthralled with him as a child. It was funny how now they found those same striking features distasteful and freakish. Changing fortunes were so often met with a change of attitude. Taryn took his mother by the shoulders and began to lead her away.
Come on, Mother. It's time to leave. So soon? But we're having such a wonderful evening.
Yes, we should go now. Lady Learsac pouted like a sullen child. Fortunately, it did not seem to last for long. A smile soon returned. As people turned their heads to watch them leaving, she took it as a mark of their disappointment that she had to retire so early. In her mind she was still, as she had always been, the most desirable and important woman in the room. She held on to Taryn, sweeping across the floor as if being escorted around a ball. She waved to the other ladies, calling out gaily,
Thank you so much for a lovely evening. We'll be back again soon.
Taryn tried to block out the sounds of laughter as they walked down the stairs and out into the street. He hailed a carriage, and they spent most of the journey home in silence. The horse came to a halt on a wide street lined with neatly kept rose gardens. Taryn paid the driver and helped his mother down from the seat. She seemed delighted with the whole thing. The carriage left, and Taryn walked with his mother a little way further down the road. He didn't like to stop directly outside the house. His mother frowned when she saw that there were no lights on in the windows. There should have at least been a fire burning in preparation for their return.
Why is it so dark?
They reached the front door. Taryn searched his pockets for the key. Lady Learsac stood patiently looking at the knocker. As far as she was concerned, all doors all doors opened as if by magic. Eventually, he found it, unlocked the door, and ferried her inside. She took off her gloves and laid them carefully on the table in the hallway. Her voice echoed in the empty foyer.
Harper? Harper, where are you? We had to open the door for ourselves. Come quickly, we need some tea.
Taryn let the door close with a soft click. The key went back in the pocket. He knew better than to leave it where she might find it.
Harper isn't here. Isn't she? Where is she? Is she sick?
She's just not here. There was no point in explaining it again. They had been through it enough times. Besides, she would have forgotten again by the morning. Instead, Taryn picked her up in his arms and carried her up the stairs. Lady Learsac leant her head against his shoulder, lamenting once more over the apparent absence of the maid. Harper had been there earlier. She could remember it quite... No, I didn't like that delivery. Harper had been there earlier. She could remember it quite clearly. It didn't do to let the staff take unscheduled evenings off. Harper had been having an extended evening off for some time now. The last time Taryn had seen her was 8 months ago, when she handed in her notice. The door to the bedroom was open. It made it a little easier to maneuver. She didn't weigh much, but the bones in her arms stuck out and would bruise easily should they knock against a door frame or wall. Taryn sat her down on the bed. Both arms automatically lifted into the air. It had taken some time to get used to the idea of dressing and undressing his mother. By this point, it barely registered. She had wandered about the house naked and wailing often enough for it to have stopped being a shock long ago. It didn't take much to do when she was being cooperative. It was far easier than letting her attempt it alone. She watched as he laid the clothes carefully over the back of the screen that divided the room. He had only turned away for a second when he felt something hard hit him just behind his right ear. He yelped. "What do you think you're doing?" Taryn touched one hand to the back of his head. There was a little blood where something sharp had broken the skin. His mother stood, brandishing the heeled shoe like a weapon. Her eyes were ablaze. "Don't touch me! Don't ever touch me!" "Calm down!" "You'll never put your hands on me again, you bastard! I hate you! Do you hear me? I hate you!" Taryn leaned back, the expression on his face weary. She slapped at him, nails clawing at his chest. It was not the first time this had happened. Memories got muddled in her mind, faces merging together. He wouldn't have minded except for the fact that they looked nothing alike. Taryn's pale features had been inherited from his mother's side. "Mother, stop! I'm not him. It's me. Taryn. Stop it now." The scratching paused momentarily. There was a flash of recognition in her eyes. Taryn waited, holding her wrists tightly as the memories faded and she returned to the present. She still seemed skeptical. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I am sure. No, it's I'm." "Yes, I'm sure. I'm your son." She lowered her hands and sniffed. "Good. I hate that bastard." He didn't expect an apology. They never came, anyway. The candlestick had been the worst one. She had caught him by surprise in the sitting room after dinner one evening. The brass corner had taken a chunk out of his skull. The mark was still there on his forehead, hidden by a carefully arranged fringe. Once she was calm, it was relatively easy to get her into bed. Walking across the room, Taryn reached into his pocket. There was a different one, sewn into the jacket for each key. It made it easier to tell if one was missing. Once the windows had been locked, he bid his mither good night. One was missing. Once the windows had been locked, he bid his mother good night and bolted the door behind him. Silence filled the house. In truth, there was not much else left to fill it with. The furnishings were sparse. Dark patches dotted the walls where the paper had hidden behind long-since-discarded picture frames. Some of the rooms were completely empty, the contents sold off or burned. They kept the lights off, for the most part. Lighting wasn't cheap, and Taryn was accustomed to the dark. The sitting room was cold and quiet. He took off his jacket and hung it on the coat stand. There was a mantelpiece over the hearth. In the middle of it, a bell jar containing a stuffed squirrel stood, taking pride of place. His mother loved it. Taryn couldn't stand the thing. Looking into the glass, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. That was a bit sloppy. He caught a glimpse of his reflection. The sight made his fingers twitch. The features that looked back at him were those of a being he did not recognize. Pushing back the fringe, he gazed intently at the scar the candlestick had made. It was the only blemish in a sea of perfect skin. Everything else was perfectly pop. Everything else was perfectly proportioned, perfectly symmetrical. Symmetrical. God damn you, Tinsley. Pa. Perfect skin. Everything else was perfectly proportioned, perfectly symmetrical. In a way, the scar was the only part of him that Taryn felt was real. The squirrel stared back at him through the glass jar. He took a seat in the armchair that faced the door. If left open, there was a clear view of the hallway. His mother was unlikely to get out again, but it never hurt to be cautious. He kept his boots on just in case. It had been 23 days since he had last left her alone for longer than an hour. On one of her better days, he had slipped a little extra something into her tea and left her passed out in the parlour. The time had been spent roaming the streets, looking for something, but not quite knowing what it was. It had done him good to get out of the house. He knew he wouldn't be able to last much longer without a proper break. The tension was creeping up his spine and knotting in his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would find a way to get out for a few hours. He had to. He was losing his mind. Sitting in the dark, feeling the hours of his life slowly slipping away. He could swear he heard that damned squirrel laughing at him. And that was The Squizzle in the Jar. Don't make that one rhyme, Rob. Okay. New folder. Get that one saved. Get it saved, mate. Time for Sanquin. Where are we saving this? In the correct folder. That would be good. San Juan. Thank God for pronunciation guides, because I would have merrily called him Sanquin. Okay. So, I got to go bathroom now. Quite a lot. So, I guess I'll probably just leave this running, and then I'll come back and do one more chapter. So, I work actually in my studio that I built out. What have I run over now? Out in the garden. So I'm going to have to go into the main house building and come back. So if you want to stick around. I'll be as quick as I can. If not, I won't be offended. Just get my boots on. And I will see you ASAP. Or not. It depends. Depends if you want to be here. Tatty buys. Get back on you bagger. Ta-da! Okay. Rob, I see you've got some weirdly low-slung jeans on today, and your t-shirt is hoisted up at the back. Well, I was building a wardrobe the other day, crouching down, and we've got some shutters, window shutters, and as I stood up, I hit the corner of the shutter and scraped up my back, down my back. And so I've got a nice wound, a really unpleasant wound open on my back, which is why my jeans are a bit low slung and my t-shirt's hoisted up a bit because it's been bandaged for a few days. And now now it seems best to let the wound air a little bit. So that's why I'm dressed like I can't dress myself. I could say I'm getting into character for Lady Learsack and not dressing myself properly. All right. Okay. Still some people here. That's nice. Hello again. Oh, I need to set up my little monitor. Just bear with me. I'll do some ASMR for you while I do this. There. Some finger flutters if you like. There you go. Some free ASMR. Right. Sanguine. D'Orsay was a great sprawling beast, one that required constant and careful observation. Standing on the streets, it was impossible to see the city for what it really was. You could catch a snippet here and there, but to truly understand it, you needed a higher vantage point. There was no greater position from which to watch. I'll probably lower my table a little bit. There we go. Hello? Yeah, okay, better. There was no greater position from which to watch over the capital than from the vantage point. There was no greater position from which to watch over the capital than from the window of Felix Sanguine's chambers. Sometimes he would stand and watch the smog as it billowed across the skyline. The chimneys spitting ash from the foundries, great stacks peppering the horizon like sentries, guarding the secrets that the acrid clouds concealed below. Prior to his rise to power, the previous administration had held their offices in the City Hall. Located in the northernmost section of the Golden Quarter, they had removed themselves from reality. Powerful men surrounded by gilded doors who knew nothing about the streets around them. It was one of the reasons they had lost their power. It was a Sunday morning, which meant that the marketplace below was abuzz with activity. Sanguine watched the lines of people thronging between the canopied stalls. Shouting and yelling, traders clamoured for attention, attempting to sell perishable wares of questionable quality and freshness to world-weary mothers, as stray children begged for thrown-away crusts. Men staggered in and out of the taverns, walking straight past the open doors of the church without second thought. They chose to worship at a different sort of altar. If it hadn't been for the profitability in it, Sanguine would have banned the gin houses. Prohibition had always proven to be an effective form of population control. Far fewer babies were produced as a result of sobriety. Fortunately for the masses, the public houses continued to do a healthy trade. Sanderson sat in the chair opposite Sanquin's own seat, at a large mahogany desk. The couple at a large mahogany desk. The captain clasped his hands behind his back. I just drew a blank at his voice. What voice did I give him? Oh, he was a bit like well, he's more clipped than that. Tyler. Right, Tyler. The tenants. The tenants of Portamont. Where do they stand now with the arrears due to Lord Lucian? I assume the matter is resolved. Sanderson curled his fingers. Did he? Curled the fingers. Sanderson curled the fingers of his hand, looking at the blistered knuckles. There was a negotiation. The tenants have now reconsidered their stance on the rental increases. Good. That land is... Good. That land is valuable. If the people are not willing to accept market rates, they should look elsewhere for accommodation. Do you have anything else to report? Nothing of importance. Sanquin turned from the window, casting his eyes downwards. They lingered for a moment at Sanderson's feet. There was a slight downturn to the corner of his mouth. The captain did not appreciate slovenliness in his employees. Sanderson, your buckle appears to have broken. The brass buckle of Sanderson's left boot had snapped off, leaving the leather frayed at the ends. I'll get it replaced. Immediately. And if you ever report to me in a similar... he's gone Yorkshire. Immediately. And if you ever report to me in a similar state of disarray, I will have your boots removed. Then you will read the... Will have your boots removed. Then you will eat them. The captain turned back to the window. Buckles included. The clock on the wall chimed, indicating the arrival of midday. There was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Sanquin adjusted his cuffs. You are late. Sanderson looked up. Vanguard stared back at him, face flushed from the wind. He was sure the door hadn't even opened. Sanderson grimaced. You're a creepy son of a bitch, you know that. Better than being an arsehole. The sound of the ticking clock synchronized perfectly with the echo of footsteps across the room. There was a good distance from the window to the desk. The captain did not hurry. Sanquin eventually took his seat. Sanderson, we are done for the day. I have matters to discuss with Vanguard. It had been years, and Vanguard still hadn't quite worked out what Sanderson's role or purpose was in the great scheme of things. He was afforded liberty that other Red Badgers were not. Yet the man offered no skill or talent that could be not... Yet the man offered no skill or talent that could not be found elsewhere. He seemed to perpetually linger like the smell on dung. Sanderson cast one last scowl in Vanguard's general direction before rising from his seat. He bowed sharply before vacating the room, presumably in the pursuit of some poor underling who would soon be relieved of his boots. I'll say one thing for the war. Sanquin paused. He liked to leave prolonged silences between sentences. It was a tactic used to pressure his visitors into letting slip nuggets of information he could use later. Often they would tell him what he wanted to know simply to fill the void. It was an uncomfortable silence. Vanguard could live with it.
It does leave a sizable dent in the population, regardless of the outcome. Did you know that there are almost 12,000 more people living in the city today than there were was when the war ended? I didn't know that. It is putting a considerable strain on our resources. Why are you telling me? I'm not contributing.
Sanquin took a deep breath. Sanquin. Sanquin took a deep breath. Vanguard often liked to try and press on his nerves. It would seem that today he was not willing to take the bait. Instead, he pressed his fingers together, rubbing the underside of his chin.
Your attitude disappoints me. We are working to solve this city's problems. They're not my problems. You work for me, and I work for the city, which makes them your problems.
That was a bit of a pop. You know what, I'm going to live with it and I'll take that one out in post. I like that. The captain sat back, smoothing down the front of his jacket.
I have a job for you. And I had to come all the way here for that. I need you to spend some time in the splinters.
Vanguard arched an arch. Did he? Vanguard's eyebrow arched. Criminal activity was rife in the city, but as far as he knew, the occupants of the splinters were nothing more than what most thought of as grifters and tricksters. A mild irritation made up primarily of those displaced by the war. They were something of a transient community, hawking supposed lucky charms from street corners to people too stupid to know a con when they saw one. More of a camp than a neighborhood, the splinters were not fixed in any one place. Hastily constructed wooden buildings with Don't like this. I like the book. Don't sack me. I don't like that reading. Hastily constructed wooden buildings would appear suddenly, as if from nowhere. They would set up anywhere that they thought they could make a bit of money. Most of the time, they stayed for a few months before it was torn down and reappeared somewhere else. People viewed them as a novelty for a while, but the welcome never lasted long.
What am I supposed to be doing in this?
Sorry. I always have chapters where I'm a bit tripping over my words.
Never lasted. What am I supposed to be doing in the splinters? Watching, observing, and bringing me information about anything I might need to know.
A piece of paper emerged from inside Sanquin's jacket pocket, folded in a crisp line down the middle. He handed it over. Unfolded, the paper depicted an image of a garish face, twisted into a gurning smile. Vanguard had seen them posted on walls and fences around the city.
What the hell is this supposed to be? I'm told these people have an establishment. They hold boxing matches, card games, the sort of thing you're familiar with, I have no doubt.
Sanquin did not try to disguise the contempt in his voice. If the lower breeds were... Excuse me. That's what happens when you do gravelly voices all the time. Just like with Lee Conley's bloody books. In his voice. If the lower breeds were like rats, these people were no better than fleas to him. Their continued existence was an affront.
Despite my best efforts to guide them towards more productive endeavours, it would seem that some of the Red Badgers have been frequenting this club.
Vanguard said nothing.
2 of my men washed up in the marina a few days ago. The last place anybody saw them was in the Splinters. There is something rotten in that neighbourhood. I can smell it from here. Why me? Why not send in Sanderson? It sounds like his sort of place.
It looked like Sanquin was trying to smile. Sanquin, not Quinn. Maybe it just doesn't make that. It looked like Sanquin was trying to smile. The corners of his mouth moved as though his face didn't understand what it was the muscles were trying to do.
You know, Vanguard, these exchanges are
No, that's a bit northern again.
You know, Vanguard, these exchanges are starting to become tiresome. I did at one point find the candour in your attitude vaguely entertaining. But I'm a busy man. Do your job, or I may forget.
No, it's Yorkshire. I've lost the voice for some reason.
He's more southern, like that. You know, Vanguard.
Do.
You know, Vanguard, these exchanges are starting to become tiresome. I did at one point find the candour in your attitude vaguely entertaining. But I'm a busy man. Do your job, or I may forget why I pulled you out. Do your job, or I may forget why it is I pulled you from that rank shithole I found you in. There are worse places than the hole. I know you want me to think that, but if you imagine that sending you back to prison is the only thing I'd do to you, then I'm afraid you've learnt nothing in my employment.
Vanguard's face twitched.
I will make sure that everyone knows exactly what you are. I will see you walk the streets from the courthouse to the pits. Rocks and stones will break your bones. When they are done with you, whatever is left will go back to the hole.
Sanquin was satisfied that the point had been made. Vanguard didn't want to go back to the hole. True, the prospect of incarceration didn't scare him the way it might some people. He belonged in prison, of that there was no doubt. Any sane jury would have locked him up and thrown away the key. In D'Orsay, you were unlikely to see any sort of jury, sane or otherwise. There were, however, too many things that Vanguard still needed to do before he could go back. Things that he could not achieve languishing in a dank cell. He had a slate that he needed to wipe clean. As it stood, there were only 2 people in the world. As it stood, there were only 2 people in the whole world that knew what had happened in Bellatro. Sanquin was one. Vanguard, the other. Vanguard could stand to be known as a criminal. He could even stand to be known as a murderer. As it stood, most people celebrated the work that he did. Their attitudes might not have been quite the same if they had known that the man who took the perverts and murderers from their streets was the same man who had ensured that so many of their sons had never come home. He did not fear death, but shame was a different thing entirely. It did not matter how many died at his hands that did deserve it. It would never make amends for the 236 who did not. Sanquin had his reasons for choosing the marks that Vanguard dispatched. For the most part, Vanguard did not care what they were. Their motivations for wanting the streets rid of particular parties might have differed, but the end results were the same. Each time Vanguard went to work,
there would be one less monster in the world. Vanguard looked at the paper in his hand. Sanquin would not be giving him the task unless there was something happening that he did not want anyone else to know about yet. The deaths of a few insignificant soldiers would usually be of little interest to him. There was an ulterior motive. No doubt, sooner or later, it would come to light. Until then, Vanguard had little choice.
There we go. Okay. That's all the streaming I'm going to do to today. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. Hope you've had a nice time. Hope you approve. If Holly's still watching this, I hope you like what I've done. Yeah, so that's it. Hope you've had a nice time. If you want to, if you want to listen to more of my streaming, there's a Dracula stream on here where I streamed some Dracula yesterday, I think it was. There's also the Complete War of the Worlds audiobook. I've also last night uploaded the War of the Worlds audiobook as a podcast, so do a search for Bailey's Bookshelf on your podcast provider of choice. It's all on Spotify, it's all on iTunes, wherever you want to go. And most importantly of all, do be on the lookout for this fantastic book that I am narrating, written by HL Tinsley.
We men of ash and shadow.
Coming ASAP. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you, and as soon as I've worked out how to end the stream, I will do. All right, thank you very much for your time, and if I do this again, I would love you to hang around and hang out with me again and chill. All right, I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.